So go ahead, Chris.
So I think that with at least some people, we can see that most of these quibbles with capitalism, especially the ones coming from the interventionist worldview, really just stem from not understanding what it actually is.
I think that's right. I think that all of us could do the world a great service simply by defining our terms more clearly and more precisely and refusing to accept their definitions. So frequently I see and watch and observe arguments between people who think of capitalism, capitalists and socialists, and mostly on our side we tend to accept the ground rules that the left sets for us and the definitions they throw at us. And so we have a very hard time articulating back against it. We have to say, no, that's an incorrect definition. Here's the correct definition. Let's discuss it now that we understand what we mean by that word greed. Let's discuss it now that we understand what we mean by that word scarcity. Those kind of things. When you get to that level, then you can finally have a civilized debate about this.
So, Chris, you did some work on this, and you wanted to break this down into finer detail, so let's take this another step. Let's go to the next level on this. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think we've talked extensively, I think, about the economic differences, but Dr. Prentice, in your speeches and your writing, you've also argued that capitalism and socialism are not different just when it comes to economics. There's a world of difference when it comes to the respective views on other things in the world. What beside economics comes to mind when you're speaking about the respective capitalist and socialist worldviews?
There's a lot of those things, so I'm going to just give you a softball here, Paul, and let's just kind of tick off some of them. Let's start with ethics.
Well, certainly it's the ethics. The ethics is in the world of philosophy, it's simply called the ethics of reciprocity. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's known as the Golden Rule. Thou shalt do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Or the ethics of reciprocity is I'm at liberty if I set you at liberty, so I pursue my self-interest, and I don't do anything to prevent you from pursuing your self-interest. I don't use force or coercion to prevent you from pursuing yours. That's an ethics. That's the moral code. But yet to a socialist, to a leftist, that's not their sense of ethics at all. Their sense of ethics is, as Marx said, from each according to their means, from each according to his ability, to each according to their needs.
Right.
So in my world, the capitalist world, it's immoral to steal from somebody. But in the socialist world, you have to understand, your listeners need to understand, in the socialist world, it is perfectly moral to steal from somebody. If I need something and you've got it, it's a moral act for me to take that from you or to use the government to take it from you. So it's very difficult to communicate sometimes with these people because of the very structural understanding of the nature of what is right and what is wrong. The ethics.
Well, I'll tell you, this is so perfect that you're saying these things. I'm just so excited about this. I want to have you back up for just a second and reiterate this phrase that you used that I first heard when I listened to one of your other interviews, Paul, where you say this code of reciprocity. I've heard the Golden Rule referred to as a lot of things, the first law, etc. And I know that the majority of religions in the world have a version of it that they work with. And we've talked about that in other shows here on Radio Free Market. But I've never heard this term before, this code of reciprocity. Boy, that sure sums it up beautifully.
Yeah, it's found in, I think it's 21 out of 23 of the world's major belief systems, religions, philosophies. All of them, the two that I can find where it's not, is Marxism and Satanism, but then I tell my audience it's redundant.
Well, geez, what a surprise.
Cicero might have called that a natural law, wouldn't he?
Well, yeah, because it really is, it sums it up basically beautifully, Are you going to respect people and their property or not? And if you're going to try to make it moral to steal from one another, and you're going to somehow declare that to be correct or right, then of course there's a gulf that separates that and the Golden Rule. Absolutely. Yeah. So, Chris, I interrupted you. You were going to take Paul through the next layer, because I know that you've been doing some really fine work on this in preparation for this.
Oh, sure. Well, I guess really quickly, just to follow up to what you've been exploring, Michael, as well as that, I think it's interesting to see, as Dr. Prentice mentioned, that it is a very biblical principle. I think you can find examples like that in the Bible. In places like the Sermon on the Mount, and that's where we often find the golden rule phrased. But Dr. Prentice, I think that there's another difference here between the different worldviews. I think that we've touched on this already a little bit, but there is this difference about the broader view of reality and what how reality can be molded, whether reality is objective or subjective, I guess we could say. Can you comment on that? What is the socialist idea of reality?
Sure. If you don't mind, let me first just finish up with the idea of the code of reciprocity. There's one more thought that comes to mind, which is in the book of James, the golden rule, as it's stated, as to love your neighbor as yourself. That's known as the law of liberty. It's actually called that, and he uses that word, the law of liberty. So anyway, so I'll go on.
That's beautiful, and that's in the book of James, huh?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's referred to that way. So now that I went off on a tangent, you have to restate your question. I apologize.
Yeah, it's okay.
That's okay. So I think that there is a kind of difference here in that the capitalist worldview seems the capitalist basic philosophy, let's say, their assumptions about the world, think that there are some very kind of objective truths that always exist, that people have natural rights and it's always wrong to violate them. Things like killing people or stealing things from people. In your experience, how does that differ from the socialist view of reality?
Sure. We say that in the capitalist world, Ayn Rand coined the phrase, and it was not from a biblical background, of course, at all. She was very much an atheist, but the idea that we have an objective reality, a concrete reality. And we discover that through logic and data and the scientific method. And that's how we knew that lightning bolts weren't thrown by Jove out of the clouds, right? It was simply done by electrons being stripped off of polar H2O molecules like the friction of the planet Earth. And then we harness that power. So that's capitalism. It's rational thought. It's the mind, the human mind. To the left of the socialist, reality is not that at all. It's what do they feel about something. It's really emotionally based, and data gets in the way, and they discard it, and it makes it very difficult for us to argue objectively with the left, because what about the children? And I can show them all the data in the world that capitalism is better for the children. But they don't seem to care because they're emotionally invested in the idea that their preconceived notion is that socialism is good for the children. So it's just emotion. It's not logic. It's not data. It's not science.
Right. Well, Michael, I think I know you have a nice saying that you have when you're comparing things like laws and kings, and I think that can inform the discussion.
Well, actually, thank you very much, Chris, because I think this is a very important point that we discuss in terms of how reality can be molded by man. We can, if it's left up to us, we can be quite arbitrary, we can be quite inconsistent, and if we're put in a position of authority, we can declare what is true, and that is what I refer to as the king is law versus the law is king. And so when I was homeschooling my daughter on these principles back when she was in the 6th and 7th grades, I recall trying to present this concept of natural law versus political law, and this is when I coined this phrase, king is law or law is king versus king is law, so that people that she could understand, and I hope our listeners can better understand that when we're talking about the law is king, we're really talking about natural law. When the king is law, then whatever the king's decisions are arbitrarily, they happen to be the law for that particular moment, for that particular king. And
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but please, Paul, comment on it if you would.
Well, it's just the idea that the reality is simply declared by the state, if you will, the modern version of the king. They simply say what is real. Hugo Chavez doesn't like the data that shows that their economy is in a mess, and so he says, well, throw out the data. Let's calculate something new. Sarkozy said the same thing in France when it shows his French standard of living 30% below the U.S. He says, well, let's throw out the data, and we'll just redo something else that shows what I already know in advance, what I feel, that the French standard of living is superior. So let's invent some numbers that show that the French standard of living is superior. So it's simply what the state says it is, and it's how they feel about things. It's not data-based. It's not scientific. It's not at all reality, or what Ayn Rand would say, objective.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like you, Paul, to address a couple of additional questions and points on this, but we are going to run into the end of this particular segment before we can let you get back with an answer. So we're going to close out this section, and we'll be back in just a minute, folks, with our final segment, talking with Dr. Paul Prentice on the moral basis of capitalism with Mr. Christopher Opperman. And so please stay with us. This is Radio Free Market. I am your host, Michael McKay, and we'll be back in just a minute. Please stay with us. Thank you very much.